She's one of these totally vibrant people who has taken the issue of food in Africa in so many different ways, and food resources, and looking at all the different variables of it, and then bringing that into a much greater focus across the world with the different international organizations that she's worked with. If I was looking at her bio sketch this morning and remembering all of the different agencies that she's worked with, FAO and many others that have made a significant difference. So she has been able to be one of these people who have been on the ground, living there, working there, in different countries of Africa and in other areas as well, and has taken that knowledge and has been able to translate it into policy and able to encourage different kinds of programs to be established throughout the world. In addition to that, as an anthropologist, she's a leader in her field. She's been president of many of the organizations in the American Anthropology Association as an umbrella, and she continues to serve in an emeritus position. I noticed that you're president of the alumni of the faculty club, the retired faculty at the University of Florida, which is a substantial, one of the big universities in the United States. So, in a sense, she carries that leadership not just in her specialty, but she brings it out in such a way that it represents a remarkable set of achievements, and she continues, as you can see here by her questions and curiosity, to bring out all of the elements that are necessary for us to be concerned with. And today, of course, as you can see, she'll be talking about security and agricultural innovation, gender or non-gender. And that's a slightly different title, but that's really the key issue that she's been able to articulate. So I'm hoping that in introducing you that we'll hear all about that theme, because that theme is one of the keys, it seems to me, that everybody has talked about so far. And now we're going to really learn about it, I think. Please come up and address us. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that very, very kind introduction. It's really a pleasure, and it's a beautiful day, and there's good things. My topic in Zambia, decades and decades ago, was religion and ritual and healthcare systems. And so I spent a lot of time going to all the spirit possession and curing ceremonies. I worked with the healers, I worked with the diviners. I thought I had the cosmology of the society and the social organization as an anthropologist all under control. So I was quite surprised one day, after I'd been there for a while, to have a delegation of women come to my doorstep one day and to say, you know everything about our most private women's medicines. You've seen all the rituals, but you don't know what it is to be a woman. I stood there in shock. I was there with my husband and my son, and I thought I had that department under control. To be a woman, they said, is to be a farmer. I had missed it completely. They gave me some hoes, they gave me some seeds, they gave me 2 plots of land, one sort of further out where I could go grow groundnuts, and one near the house where I could grow vegetables. Of course, in my cocky self, I went out and bought some seeds, European seeds, well, American type seeds for carrots, celery, all those things. But they gave me seeds for local products, local vegetables. All of the European vegetables died. All the local products were really very meager because it was a drought year. And my family and I would have starved if it had depended on me to be a farmer that year. Well, I thought, oh, that's very, very interesting. I'm still going to focus on religion and ritual. And, you know, when I went back 5 years later, I was still doing more of the same. And it took 9 years to sink in about the importance of women in agriculture. Subsequently wound up being at the Food and Agriculture Organization, being head of women in agriculture on a worldwide basis with about $50 million worth of projects and so forth. I won't go into that. But it took me a very long time. And so I am sympathetic to people, or with people, who don't realize how important women are in farming and in agriculture on a planetary basis. And I don't mean people just having houseplants. I mean people who are actually feeding themselves, their families, and their communities. So I think we are familiar with the 8 Millennium Development Goals. Number 3 is to promote gender equality and empower women. And I will tell you that particular goal is broken down into 3. And you see 3.2, it says non-agricultural sector. I think that's an error on the part of the UN, quite frankly. But anyway, that's what's being measured. And I'm going to go back a minute. Do you see the countdown, 2 years and 163 days? There's a countdown monitor that you can actually just Google, Millennium Goals to monitor, and you can follow how many seconds and minutes and days till 2015, which is the ending date for this exercise, and you can see how far all the countries in the world have gotten along those lines. Well, in recent times, some have argued that women are the next agricultural revolution. They certainly are a major factor in solving food security. However, look at the list of constraints. I can barely fit them on a slide, and they sum up a huge number of things. Now, I'm an anthropologist. You heard me talk yesterday or the day before about culture and how that gets in the way sometimes, and yet, of course, we understand the nature of it and the importance of it. So culture, customs, religions, patriarchy, patrilineage, lack of inputs, lack of extension, lack of money, lack of good science and research, and more important, as I'm beginning to see, is lack of political will to commit to reach smallholder women farmers on a really large scale. There are all kinds of little programs everywhere. But that's a long list of constraints. So here's what I'm going to take today, and I'm going to urge all of you to put your seatbelts on because I tend to go quite rapidly. And so we're going to move along on these topics. I'm going to talk about the constraints that women face, what disadvantaged and advantaged women farmers look like. So some farmers, or most of them, are disadvantaged, the women. But some farmers, and they are fewer, the women, are very advantaged. They figured it out. They provide role models, they provide goals, they provide ideas for how things can work out better. And I've spent a lot of time interviewing people in both camps and living with people in both camps. And they're radically, radically different. So when I conclude that all women are not alike, you'll understand where some of that comes from. What are the innovative methods to capacitate to help women? And by the way, every time we help a woman, we help a man. And the reason for that, if it works really well, the men are really interested in it. They can eat the food. The kids, of course, benefit. And if there are programs that reach women, we know by the time they reach women, they've already reached men. So I would like you to keep that model in mind as we go through this. How can women help food security? Why call it an agricultural revolution? And what can we do to accelerate these changes? Well, there's a large range of women in agriculture. I'm summing up something Saul said the other day, plant domestication to recipe diversification, as a very mini 5-word history of where we started and where we are now. And it leaves all the steps along the way out. The other thing I would like to point out to you is I want to coin a new word here, and that is agropreneurs. And these are women who are involved in commercial enterprises. They're entrepreneurs, but focused on agriculture. So that's like an ethnivore, to go with Saul's new word as well. Now, let's look at some of the data. This is but a sprinkling of the data in visual form. This is the number of women involved actively in, or the percent, in a number of countries. Obviously, it's a very small selection, particularly small selection for Africa, where women are so involved in agriculture. And I might add that under the industry and services part of this diagram, we can have the agro-processing, and we can have all the other kinds of industrial and industry type activities, transport and so forth, that can also include women. So just to keep those numbers in mind. Here's one that will give us some actual numbers. 72.4% in Pakistan. That surprised me. Bangladesh, 68%. It didn't surprise me. Bhutan, 72%. It didn't surprise me. Our colleague last night in his talk talked about 50% of the population in India being farmers, and of those, 65% were women. So, and you can see the year that these data come from. There are so many charts, so many findings. One of the things we're working on right now is a piece on gender for under the President Obama's Feed the Future initiative of $1.5 billion that he pledged the G8 in 2009. And I'm working on the gender paper, so we'll have more and more of these findings. They're just everywhere. They do 2/3 of the poor livestock keepers of the world. They are 60% of the undernourished. I mean, I could just go on and on pulling these things out. So what? They're there. They've been there. What does it matter? Land. I want to make a big deal out of ownership of land, because if you don't own the land, you're not going to improve it. You're not going to put in those picket fences. You're not going to repave the driveway. You're not going to paint it. You're not going to, your house. If you don't own the land as a farmer, you're not going to plant trees. You're not going to put in fertilizer. You're not going to pay much attention to it, except what you have to do at that particular season. And if you can't pass it on, you won't be so concerned about its fertility the following year. And you can see that, remember, this only goes to 35%. There's the rest of the up to 100% that continues out that way. So I was surprised to see that it was that high in Botswana. I've been there several times and I would not have guessed. I was not surprised to see that it was so low in some of these other countries in Africa, like Congo. And I was not surprised to see that it was also low in places like Vietnam and Indonesia. But anyway, it's extremely important because you can't improve it and you're not so interested in new technologies. That's only part A. Part B, if you don't own the land, you can't get loans, you can't get collateral for improvements, for new techniques, for agricultural machinery, because you have no collateral. Nobody will listen to you if you're not a person. You have no legal status. So it all works together. Here's an interesting one from 3 studies by my dear friend Carmen Diana Deere, who's been working in Ecuador, Ghana, and India, and did comparative work on all the factors that capacitate women in agriculture and in the household. And you can see the most interesting one is Ecuador. If you add the number of female owners, individual, it's 30%. That's the highest here. And if you add it with the principal couple, in other words, the husband and the wife have joint ownership. We understand that a lot in our society. If you add that together, you get 66% of women being involved one way, either individually or with the husband, in terms of land ownership. That is remarkable. And when I had the pleasure to go to Ecuador in 2012 and to see women and to see what they were doing, even if they were poor or if they were rich, they really had a sense of themselves and how they could actually make decisions about their economic and reproductive or their economic lives. Well, the Food and Agriculture, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN estimates that closing the gender gap in terms of access to productive resources, and those are land, credit, machinery, agrochemicals, etc., they could really make a difference. It could eliminate the yield gaps. Now, I read yield data for so many crops, maize, corn, rice, soybean, whatever it may be. And if there are women and men in a study, for example, there's a recent one in Ethiopia, and it says, oh, women and men. Yeah, women's yields were lower. I found that all over Malawi. They're lower. But if we factor out the fact that their land is less fertile and it's smaller and they didn't have the right farm machinery, I guess it's about equal. And that, I keep looking at stuff like that and saying, huh? It's just not equal, you know? And we could increase the gap, decrease the gap by something like 20 to 30%. Now, you see this increased domestic agricultural output, and it's 2.5 to 4% or 12 to 17%, believe it or not, both in the literature, and I put them both in there to show you how confused everybody is and how we don't really have great data. But we really think that it's going to make a very, very big difference. 2.5 to 4% is over 100 million people. The very lowest figure, according to FAO, is the smallest, is that figure. So I just put or more if it's some of the larger figures, which I really think it would be. So that's why people are saying women are the next agricultural revolution. Because if we can make these changes, things will change.
I just have a question. I think it's important at this time rather than wait. How do you factor in all these numbers, agro-business?
Get into it.
Oh, you're going to get to it.
Yeah, probably not at the level you want, but that's another talk. But anyway, so who are the disadvantaged women? Well, they are a very large percentage of all those women farmers. I'm just going to show you a few slides about them and more about the advantaged ones because they provide the models. But these are the majority, and they do vary from very, very insecure to being at sort of a stable subsistence level. Everybody's being fed, not a whole lot of surplus for market sales, and they're not plugged into marketing chains and value chains. They don't have enough of all these things that are listed there, and over and above that, they don't have intensification in their agriculture because they don't know how to do it. They also may have some of the worst lands, and they also, of course, don't own them. They may just have access to them from time to time, and that access can actually be diminished and can be taken away. They also don't have a whole lot of independent decision-making at the household level, and I'm going to show you a new method that just came to us in 2012 by IFPRI and USAID, and we'll get to what the alphabet soup means in just a minute. Now, part of the reason they're disadvantaged, they're just given land to work on by a family member. And if that family member, say a husband or a father, passes away, or if they are divorced, the land then reverts back to either that family or well, usually it's just back to that family. Now, that means that they don't get a chance to cultivate it anymore. Now, if we look at who these people are, especially I worry about very young women and very old women, tend to leave out the youth in this discussion of women in agriculture. And many of the young women would do anything not to be in agriculture. After all, they were punished in school by having to work in the school garden if they did go to school, and they did anything that was really, you know, not proper or whatever they get punished for in schools, didn't do their homework. The less educated, and also people with fewer kin. People with fewer kin don't have the resources from their kin group for land, so those are some of them. Here's a picture from actually Botswana and Cambodia. So when we look, and here's something for the International Day of Rural Women in last year, we look at the roles they play as farmers and also with livestock. I don't want to only emphasize crops, because livestock and even fish and fisheries is very important. They provide water, they do care. Then they have less access to land, healthcare, education, and credit. And you can see that when they do get any funds, when they do get food, they reinvest that in their families. So they're not going out gambling, looking for another girlfriend or boyfriend. They're not like their husbands are looking for other women. They're not doing that. They're not drinking it up in the local bars. They're actually using everything they have to feed their families and take care of their families for the most part. So you can see it takes 60 hours per hectare for hand weeding a 1 hectare field, and according to the people I talk to, I think it takes longer than that, and you will see why these new technologies that I'm going to show you make such a difference, because weeding is a woman's task, and if we can use new science to reduce the weeding, and we can, that makes a huge difference. Now, there are all kinds of flow charts. I'm not going to attempt to explain any of them. I just show you one. Of when we start to disaggregate. This one's for Asia, the Pacific region, and it lists all the regions right there. You can see the rural household production segment, the farm production, the home production, the off-farm production, the community, because these are people. It's not that they're only farming, they have their community to deal with, they have to take care of their home, and sometimes they do things off the farm, even selling little things or doing off-farm work with the roads, for example, in Botswana. They hire women to build the roads, and India too. So we can have diagrammed these for societies all over the planet, and we have noticed the same configuration of constraints in many of these categories as are noted in this flow chart. The other thing that has exacerbated the situation has to do with male migration. Male migration, especially in areas where women are the farmers. Men can leave them on the farm and will leave them for one of two things. One, to go to more either peri-urban or urban areas for work, for cash. Or in drought situations, and Bangladesh is the classic case, men leave their families in times of disasters. Sometimes they make it back, sometimes they don't. So the women and children and the elderly, both elderly women and men, stay behind, and they have a problem, all the same problems as just women alone would have women alone would have in general, but they have that extra burden of other family members if the males have left. And of course we know that their educational opportunities are less, and what's more interesting from an anthropologist's point of view, they can't really move ahead because gendered norms reinforce the fact that women have to stay in their place. Even if their husbands are gone, they're still expected to be dutiful wives and not be in the public realm. That's pretty hard if you're trying to improve your agriculture, to get cash, get technology, get extension services, but you're constrained culturally as well. Now, shift gears for a minute and look at the smaller number of people who are quite advantaged. They're doing just fine. Why would we want to look at them? We want to look at them because they provide clues, they provide models, they provide ideas. How does this, rags to riches take place? We have that model in our own society. How do people get ahead? If we only look at the bottom and we can never solve anything with examples, we can't make it in terms of our programs, and we can't try to design things better. Well, here's some examples, and these are all my photographs. I've worked with these people. Contract farmers, this is green beans, French beans in Kenya. The women learned the irrigation. They had the market already under control. for example, because the company found them, paid them, gave them the piping, and so forth. But they had to lay it, they had to understand the technology, they had to pick it, they had to market it, and so forth. Then there's commercial farmers. They're just like men, commercial farmers. There's really no difference. They have the larger hectareages, they have the tools and farm equipment, they have the bank loans. This woman is from St. Lucia, and she does flowers and potted plants for the Caribbean and the southern United States market. Then there are the agro-processors. They are taking in the wheat and making cookies just like regular companies do. Or maybe they just own the cookie making company or factory or the jam factory. They are adding the value. They're bringing in the hot peppers and making the hot pepper sauces, and that you see so many of them in different places. So then there's the agribusiness people who are buying up products, agricultural products, and then shipping them to other places. The Caribbean women are very well known for that as a for instance, and also that's very common in West Africa, all over Asia as well. Now, some of these people are very, very highly educated. They have just chosen agriculture to be their vocation. Some of them have advanced tertiary degrees in MBAs and business management. Some of them are agronomists, some of them are horticulturalists. They have all these degrees, and therefore they have very, very similar accesses to the kinds of things that men have access to, which is to say money, loans, credit. They may own land. They may have inherited land from their families, and they're wealthy landowners, as a matter of fact. People have just been talking at this conference about people with master's degrees in the United States who now want to be farmers. They've got the management techniques, they've got the financial things under control. Now they want to actually go and do the farming, live in a more rural area, get away from urban stress and so forth. So that's a somewhat interesting trend. The other thing is these women, just as the men, are linked into all kinds of business networks and farmers associations. And that opens up all the doors for knowing people at the bank, marketing goods, international travel. I have a slide on that that's coming up, and so forth. This was one interesting company in Kenya. Flowers, cut flowers is a very big industry for the market in Holland and the Netherlands. A lot of it coming from Kenya. And what we have in the same company is the low-level women agricultural workers. Here they are preparing the soil and the seed beds in this one slide, and then working with the cut roses, magnificent flowers that they're growing, all beautifully organized. And here we have management at the bottom doing all the counting and the mid-management and the trays and the marketing and the value supply networks and so forth. And of course, the director of the company is quite an interesting woman. She's a member of the various networks in Kenya, and she flies everywhere, is always flying back and forth to make sure that her flowers are in good shape, and if anything's wrong, to make changes with the chemical sprays that they put on all of these things for transport and so forth. So I have, for women in commercial agriculture, it's a huge range. It's not as large a number of people as the disadvantaged farmers, but there's still a huge range of people who have found their way in doing these kinds of things. And I have divided that into what I might call less than optimal ways and really optimal ways and the same ways as men, just so we can conceptualize this and look at the vast differences. So less than optimal ways, I saw women pooling land. I saw them getting it as gifts. Whether they could keep it or not is another issue. They could borrow it. They could control what they were actually doing, in other words, their own labor, and they could belong to local groups of women who could actually save money. They're called merry-go-rounds, and get the pot at 1 month, so to speak. Everybody puts in a certain amount, and it goes to one month, another. And then when you get that large amount, guess what? You buy a piece of farm machinery, which they might not be able to do otherwise. Some new ways. We talk about venture capital all the time. They plug into it. they diversify their enterprises. In the contemporary world, they're plugged into very extensive marketing data and wider networks, just as the men are. There really isn't any difference. The computer stuff, and number one, and also their tentacles are in what's happening in all the major markets in terms of pricing and all the value supply chains along the way. Some of them actually own the factories, and in a number of places, women are the owners of supermarkets. But obviously, we know some of them own groceries, but you don't think of them as supermarket owners, just to raise our expectations there. So here's some of the same methods that men use. They're all just there. I've actually mostly gone over those. And I have a whole table if anybody wants to look at that whole thing in comparison. Same methods as men, less than optimal and more creative. So it's a complicated table. I won't go through it, but you get the idea. Now, women, as well as men, are greatly facilitated in the modern era by cell phones and ICT, mobile banking and internet and all the things that are available there, by the agricultural technologies and equipment, training associations, and getting a global perspective on what it is to do agribusiness. And I think it's very interesting that this one group of people that I worked with were very interested in global methods. And I'll get to that in just a second, but in the Digicel is from Haiti, by the way. And the little picture on the bottom, it looks like it's in a rural area with a little graphic. Can you see it? I should have made it bigger. It's right here. Daddy, mommy, and the kids all having cell phones. It's an entryway to every town in Haiti, every city, every community by Digicel. And just about everybody has them, at least one in a household. So, and that's really a poor country, let me tell you, it's right at the bottom. These cell phones and internet can provide business tips, they can provide market prices. You don't have to try to market your produce, get on the bus by the time you get there with your produce. The market is flooded, or the market is closed. It's similar to the medical stuff. You don't have to sit in the doctor's office. You call first and find out if the clinic's open that day, and then you go. And that's been used.
You have to have some education to be able to.
Yes, you do. But usually there's a child in the family or somebody in the family. Now the internet is different, but the cell phones people can use. And what we found at FAO, we did a lot of projects exactly because of what you're saying with illiterate women. And what we taught them was numeracy, like at the early time, giving them calculators. And they could figure out all the numbers, and they could look at a list of prices. They really couldn't read much. They could learn the word for and price, and then they could look at all the prices and how that varied. And now they can translate that for that list of market stuff on their phones. So that's what we're talking about. They really can't. They're not really good. Some of them. And this is a slightly older picture, as you can see from the computer, but probably not that old, because it's these exact women from Uganda. You see a sort of younger, and a mixture of younger and older women finding out those things and then telling their mommies and daddies about what to do or not to do. A lot of the stuff on women has been aided by leadership and science programs over the last 30 to 40 years. And this has been through the international institutes like the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, called the CGIAR system, NARS, National Agriculture Research Institutes, all of these things working on gender issues and also hiring women scientists, and they've been mandated to keep track of the percentages and the numbers and the ranks of all these people. Also, there have been a lot of international conferences, and so people who could never have literally found their way to an airport or gotten on a plane or attended, and may still be illiterate even in their attending, have managed to see the world, have managed to go to these conferences, has managed to get have interaction with people not only from the other countries, but but also from their own country, but in a different part of their country. So a lot of this has been going on for 30 or 40 years. It's laid the base for some of the things I'm talking about today. If it hadn't been for all of these things, we wouldn't just be jumping in at the end. It wouldn't mean anything. But this has been going on for 40 years. Now, here's a group of people on the cover of a Business Women's Association in South Africa, the Rainbow Nation. And I interviewed a number of these people who are in this picture. They have been, they have formulated networks, even offices throughout the country of South Africa, as a for instance, of all the women who are involved in business. Now that includes people who are not involved in agricultural businesses, but the agricultural ones are there as well. And then the International Federation of Agricultural Producers, has a standing committee on women in agriculture. How would women from Uganda, Nigeria, and Mozambique have gotten together without these kinds of organizations? Difficult, but now common. This is a group I spent a lot of time with. The West African Enterprise Network, the Southern African one, and the East African Enterprise Network. 23% were women. They all had college degrees. Some of them had masters and a couple of PhDs. They were scattered all over. They were advocates for business and for women's issues as well. They had no trouble handling that within their countries. And they had chapters in 31 countries. I probably interviewed people from about 12 of those countries and went to those countries over about a year period. Okay, so enhancements for women in agriculture can involve upscaling to larger ventures. They can involve innovative methods, international travel, and more money to capacitate. I mean, that's how it works for everybody, meaning men as well. Then, as I said, new interventions. Now, the very last one, new measurements and new trackings. And this was, quote unquote, developed, invented last year, 2012, by the US government, USAID, and by IFPRI, a member of the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research. So it's complicated, and it's just being tried. It's the Women's Empowerment in Agricultural Index, and it's designed to measure empowerment, agency, and inclusion of women in the agricultural sector. And it is very difficult to both understand and implement, but we're all thinking that it's going to give us a basis to be able to talk cross-culturally and to look at the different segments of society and to look at different parts of a country because it's not all the same even within one country. It has two sub-indices. The first is to assess the degree to which women are empowered in 5 domains: decisions about agriculture production, access to and decision-making about productive resources, control over income, leadership in the community, and time allocation. So this has been very carefully thought out, and here's where it starts to get complicated. I don't even think I'll show you the tables, but I do have them if you want to see them. But production, resources, income, leadership, time, and look at leadership, a group member versus speaking in public. Well, that makes sense. There's a big difference in terms of the kind of input you can give and outputs you can expect, depending on where you are. Input in productive decisions versus autonomy in production. And you see they're weighted in terms of developing a score. So that's very, very interesting. The second one measures gender parity within the household. Okay? We talk a lot about that in our own society. Are men and women making decisions together or separately, or are they together when they make their decisions? It's a big thing for all couples everywhere. This represents the percent of women who are equally empowered as the men in their households. And it shows if there's a gap. So it may be that within a certain area, something like 25% of the households and these are the data for North Ghana, by the way. 25% of men and women, or 25% of the households, excuse me, men and women are equally empowered in the household and make joint decisions. But 75%, they don't. And that's in the same area. So you can imagine that probably doesn't bode as well in those households for women doing so well in agriculture. So that's what this is for. Then there are new paradigms that help women. And what I want to talk to you about today is something called CAPS, Conservation Agriculture Production Systems, which I just had the pleasure of viewing in 3 countries, Haiti, Northern Ghana, and Cambodia. And this was part of Your Tax Dollars at Work because it was evaluating the U.S. government's, USAID's projects on sustainable agriculture and natural resource management. And it was just coming up to its 5th anniversary of CAPS and 10th anniversary of these projects. They're in 13 countries around the world, and the idea is what should go next. Okay. Sustainable intensification is what's coming next, by the way. Okay, so these new paradigms, women actually restore their lands, as do men. They make use of advanced techniques in cultivation and also agriculture, livestock management, marketing, but we're just looking at cultivation here today. It impacts on household and regional food security. And over and above that, it reduces women's labor. When is the last time you heard that? It reduces women's labor, that's a good thing. They actually then have more time to attend the meetings and do community things. And they buy more land, buy machinery, and make sure the kids go to school. So those are some spin-offs of reduces women's labor. So this is a fairly radical idea. Everybody's been taught that we must plow. And you know, we had to, in India, cut down the forest for the baseball bats and the cricket bats and plow the wood for the plows when the women were trying to hug the trees. We saw that last night in the presentation. But this method doesn't require plowing. It's called no-till, and if you can't accomplish that, there's minimum till, and it doesn't disturb the soil so much, and that prevents erosion in and of itself. It doesn't have all that beautiful topsoil on top, and then it dries out in the arid areas and literally blows away or gets washed away in the rainy areas. It uses mulch covers to cover the land, or crop covers to cover the land to keep the land fertility in. It deals with correct crop rotations. It sequesters carbon within the soil. And I added this also based on last night's yesterday morning's talk by Dr. Lawrence and the earthworm example, people being punished for making their land more fertile with vermiculture in the Philippines. He was talking about that yesterday morning. So believe it or not, when we pulled it all apart, there they were, the soil had improved.
I'm just interested in how you can apply male-female benefit for no-till covering. How could that be better for women as to men?
Good, good. Who does the weeding? The mulch cover or the cover crops reduces the number of weeds. And I could not believe it. In all 3 countries, the first words out of almost all the women was, we like this because, well, usually they weed 3 times, and the first weeding is really horrendous. And, you know, it's just plain sunlight on top of them. It was pretty much 85 to 105 degrees, or mostly 95 to 105 degrees. It's a bit more. They were so impressed with the lack of, or the reduction in weeds, let me put it that way. So there was just the first weeding and then a small second weeding. They never had third weeding with the technique. So they were pretty happy with that. The other thing I don't want to forget is because of that, and because they had less weeds anyway, they did all use herbicides. That's another issue. But in Cambodia, they made sure to tell me that they weren't using, the really strongest ones, the really toxic. They had moved to the less toxic. So they were no longer using atrazine, for example. I just put that up there to jog my memory on it, but they were not using it anymore. And they had been using it. It's not that they were trying to use it, but they were using it. And they stopped because of this method. So can I just do a very quick tour of those 3 countries? And before I get to the conclusions at the end. And as I was putting this together, I realized, oh my goodness, I did go to only 3 of the countries. It would have been nice to have gone to 13 of them. But how interesting that one was a Christian country, one was a Buddhist country, and one was, the north of Ghana is Muslim, the south is Christian. So I thought, well, that's an interesting thing. I'm not sure where I want to go with that conclusion, but I put it in here just because I think it might be interesting for this group. So Catholicism in Haiti, Christian belief system. Women own lands in Haiti. Often it's not the best. It's on slopes, not as good as men's. This picture right here is preparation for the trials, and the idea was to show people first, number one, what this kind of new technique looks like, but over and above that, what works in that locale, what cover crops, what kind of mulch, how deep is the mulch. Believe it or not, that is a huge issue, because their traditional mulch brings insects. And all this had to be worked out very, very scientifically. There are no gender differences on that. The gender differences come on labor, and they come on the fact that because of no-till, women can cultivate larger spaces and have been getting access to or buying more land. That's really different. And getting land titles, so that's really, really different. These women just went on and on and on about the no weeding, and that they thought because of the no weeding, they were going to be able to expand production. And this is a finding everywhere. This is one of the technical people trying all these different variations. They did a whole lot of trials. The other thing that is really unique, I don't know if you know what on-farm farmer-managed trials are. And that is, instead of just trials at a research station, where things have been growing for years and years and the soil's pretty good, and the people there are measuring and they know what they're doing and all that, having those trials in the fields that people already own, on the plots of land, and they are the ones who then have to manage it. The technical people come in and say, hey, do this, do that, you're not doing this right. But the people themselves are seeing it in their own plots, and they have to do the management. I have seen very bad results. I have seen fabulous results that were better than the research station and everything in between. But that's a thing that's very important. But usually the people who were what we call the trial cooperators were men, because the extension people knew them and felt comfortable with them. Well, what was so interesting was the men came very diligently to all the sessions. They learned all these things. But then they migrated, they moved around, their wives did all the work. They had never had any of the training. That accounted for some of the discrepancies that we saw along the way of very poor husbandry and management techniques. But that's not being allowed to happen here. They're on top of it, and they're working with local partners, the agricultural CA. It's the comparable to Paul Farmer's health initiative in Haiti, and this is the agricultural one. Cambodia, interesting in particular because it has a very heavy Hinduism in its Buddhism. Because they just sort of built on top of Hinduism. And it differs radically from places, let's say, like Thailand or Nepal or Tibet, which is, it doesn't have that. Every place we went, there were these shrines. Every house had one in front of the house. Everybody was very concerned with this. By the way, I liked the first one. Let me see, where's that? Right there. The woman is way behind here. And here's the Buddha. Here's the these two are farmers. And it's a matrilineal society, by the way, Cambodia. And, but he's in the front, she's in the back, he's kneeling, she's standing up. We found, this was next to a Buddhist shrine, and when we went there, we noticed that there were animal figures and so forth. Every one of them had a bottle of water in front. You know, in the olden days, it would have been a glass of water. But she didn't have a bottle in front of her, so we ran out to the car and left a bottle of water in front of her. So now, what is so interesting is what we've all been trying to do for all these years is get tractors and cattle to farmers so that they would have the wherewithal to do plowing and ground preparation, land preparation. And people were saying, oh my God, those cows are, and oxen are such nuisances. They are now running through our fields and they're eating the remnants, they're eating the residues that's left after the crop, and we want those to stay on. We want that mulch now. Before we try to get rid of it, we burned it off, polluting that environment. So we had people in Haiti and in Cambodia in particular who had completely stopped burning. And I used to run around the world justifying slash and burn agriculture as just because I lived with it for 3 years in Zambia, as, oh, isn't this a great method? It clears the land, and you know, the ash provides a natural fertilizer, and they put the soil over it. But that's pretty much disproved in terms of being the best method. And this was really a bit more proof of the subject. So I found that very interesting. Now here are some women farmers, and they have land ownership. The women who, this is Cambodia, the women who are able to work with this methodology have the same requirements as the men who work with the technology. They all should have 2.5 hectares, I've talked about this before, 2.5 hectares of land or more. And so these farmers have 2.5 to about 10 hectares of land who are in this project. On the side here is our newly minted master's student who is Cambodian and has been trained in the U.S. and come back to take over the leadership. And people just love this guy, and I see why, because he's nice and he understands the culture and he's really trying to help everybody. This is a family over here. So they receive the technical assistance that they need. Here's a picture of where they live, and notice that there's a motorcycle. They have been able to buy transport, a motorcycle, the cheap Chinese motorcycles, both in Africa and Asia, are helping everybody get around, and we've had numerous examples of that. Now here's what it looks like. In the top, they actually just grew a huge field of this one particular crop, and then just at one point mowed it down. Straight down, we were there while they were mowing. I just watched them just mow it right down, and then the idea is to plant in it, and then you don't have to dig up the soil, so you maintain everything that's in the soil, and the crops do very well. They've done all these trials showing the differences. Now on the bottom, the cover crop the mulch is laid between the rows, so you don't want those cattle around to munch that up. And you don't want to have to pull it out and take it to market. And mulch is very, very pricey in the market, and farmers make a lot of money, so it's a hard sell to convince them not to leave the stove or not to leave the stalks. You can also burn it for fuel wood in places where that's a problem. So you can see how this reduces weeding. It also reduces preparing the land. Those women farmers told me that they had to pay for a hectare plot. When they added all their plots together, it came to 4. I think they had 2 different plots, 1 and 3. They paid about $300 for tractor services, or they could even do ox plow. It was a little bit cheaper. The problem is the world problem. And I was first alerted to it in Botswana many years ago when I evaluated another Your Tax Dollars at Work project. The African Development Foundation their project there. And it was cows and cattle and farming and all those things, but there were tractor services. And I thought, oh, that's just wonderful. I have a great picture on the tractor, and it's one of those early pictures, you know. But I then found out all the men got their lands plowed first with the tractor. The women had to wait. By the time they got their lands plowed, especially the female heads, it was too late for a good crop. And I've heard that over and over and over again. So the fact that they don't have to wait in line and have the men with the larger fields, they'll get paid more, so people who are giving tractor services, I mean, it makes sense economically why the men are first. Men have more land, they pay more. It's the market, supply and demand. But without that, the women just can proceed. And these women said they saved $300 by not having to pay for tractor services or ox plows in their area. And they didn't have to weed either. So here are two of them, two fairly famous ones, because a movie has been made, and they are two of the actors in the movie. And they are looking at trials that have been done by the project, and they helped capacitated work in these trials. So they're kind of examining how their crops are doing. They're applying all the scientific knowledge and information to measure the progress of these crops. So here's where I put the earthworms in. I would never have thought of it except for the example yesterday morning. When we pulled the mulch apart, we saw movement in the earth, of the insects and the worms, and look at the color of it. The other ones, the controls that didn't have this, were kind of a sandy, light tan color. But this was dark and moist and alive and you know, in a good way. And it was really interesting. And if you look at this diagram over here on your right, here's the difference in carbon. It's not a huge difference, 1% versus 5%, but that it turns it back into that fertile, moist, good soil, and it doesn't erode with all that cover stuff. So especially in arid places where the wind, or in very rainy places with the runoff, this is amazing. It just happened to pour like anything during these things. And the trial areas were quite different than the control. So the CAPS areas versus the control. So except I have this picture, but it's kind of a boring picture. I looked down at my feet, and I had sunk about that far in the mud in the regular plots. And then I walked on the one in the last picture. Oops. With the mulch between it. It was all wet, so this is a picture when it's dry. And I just walked on the ground. And I thought, that is such a demonstration. It was so seductive as a model of something that would work. So I think that's one of the things that women can be helpful in noticing, as well as men. Your question here, women have more time to attend community based organizations and their meetings where they share information. They now use fewer herbicides, as I said, and they're using their profits to do two things: increasing the size of their plots and lands, or having more, and now they know they have to get the titles when they get them. This is in Cambodia, and this is quite advanced. And this woman is our movie star, and she used her profits to buy a motorcycle. So she is one of the spokespersons for CAPS in Cambodia. It's called BMC because it has to do with the mulch and so forth, and women's participation. And she says that these techniques help the farmers, especially my family, clearly understand the methods of soil fertility restoration. And so I think women can become some of the best spokespersons for soil fertility, because they know the soils they have been given, the plots they have been given, are the worst plots. They're on slopes, they're dead, the soil fertility is lower, and men don't want to cultivate there if they don't have to, and they've given them to the women. And this was no more clearer than in Ghana, which is coming up. By the way, here at the Farm Machinery, this very unusual multi-functioning implement that's been designed for this. And a couple of the women have purchased these seeders to plant because they can. They've made money on this, and they can actually handle